everyone, it's Priya here, and in today's video I'm going to be using the Derwent Inktense Blocks to create an illustration in my sketchbook. For the sketchbook I'm using the Hahnemühle Nostalgia sketchbook. This is the A4 size, which is the largest size compared to my usual A5 that I use. And for the blocks I'm using the 72 set. Now, when it comes to using the Derwent Inktense range, I've used the pen sets as well as the pencils and the blocks, but I've used the pencils the most and maybe the pen sets. But the pencils, I've used them for a complete series. If you've watched my animal habitat art series, you'll know that I've drawn over 150 animals using the Derwent Inktense pencils. So if you'd like to see those videos, then you can head over to my homepage. I've got a playlist with all of those videos for you. So you could see I also have a swatch made for the colors. Now I tend to make swatches of all my supplies just to make it easy for me to recognize colors and to select colors for my illustrations. With the Inktense blocks, I highly recommend making a swatch. The reason being, with the Inktense range, they are ink. So once they're activated with water, then you see the true color. So it looks a bit different once you apply it dry until you add water, and then it looks completely different, like another color. So I highly recommend having that swatch made. It makes it much easier for you to select colors when you are painting or drawing or creating an illustration. Also, when you are creating your swatch, try to keep the blocks back into their tin in the same position or same place that they have, because it becomes hard for you to eventually pick them out, because the colors are hard to pick when you're looking at them in a block form compared to when you're looking at them in on paper. And your swatch won't be helpful to you if you are moving the the blocks around in your pen set. So I highly recommend that keeping the blocks in the tin in their places will help you to be able to select colors correctly based on your swatch. You could see I went in with this particular illustration without a sketch, and I just went in with the brush. There are different ways you can use the Inktense blocks. In the way that I use them, and I prefer to use them, is like you would a watercolor pen set, where I wet the brush, remove the excess water, and then apply the brush to the block, and then pick up pigment from the block, and then apply it to my paper, depending on what I'm painting or drawing. You could do it that way, and that way will help you to layer and build up your image slowly. Or you could even wet the paper and have a wet in wet technique, where you can wet the paper and then go in with some color on your brush, and then let that color flow and the pigment flow, and let it go on the paper and let it do whatever you need it to do and move it around on the paper. However, bear in mind that this is ink, so it will definitely stain the page. So you're not going to be able to lift the color off like you would if you were to change your mind about a watercolor, for example. If you do put the wrong color, you can lift that color off. With Inktense, you can lift off to an extent, but it's going to obviously have some of that color stained on the paper. And obviously, if you do press down too much on the paper with the paper towel, you can damage the paper, because it is a very strong color. It's ink, so it's not going to be easy to lift off, and it is going to stain. And also, talking about using these techniques, you can use the same techniques, the blocks that you would with the pencils. For example, layering. You can add multiple layers of different colors and then blend over with water, activate those colors and get them to mix and create a new shade or new color. Now remember, with these Inktense blocks, the same with the pencils, once you apply them to paper, they look one way, and once you add water, they change and the color becomes completely a different color. So bear that in mind when you are doing your illustrations or paintings and drawings, that you take that into consideration. Another way that you can use the blocks is by using the blocks directly themselves. That means like holding the blocks as you would a pastel, although these are not pastels, so they do not work like pastels, and they are not as messy as pastels. When you use the blocks holding them, your fingers don't have much residue on them holding the block. Also, once you apply it to the paper, you don't have a lot of powder and dust. However, sometimes you do have a little bit of crumbling of the blocks when you are moving it on the paper. So you got to bear that in mind when you are painting and drawing, to make sure that you don't let those crumbs of the blocks go onto areas where you don't want them to be. Otherwise, you can smear them with your hand, or you could even smear them into areas that you are painting where you don't want those colors. So just bear that in mind as well. Another thing to remember by using the blocks is that you can have wet techniques using the blocks directly, or you could use them directly on the paper as you would with the pencils or just, using the brush. But using the brush, you're getting more of the actual color that you want to use for the illustration. You're already activating the color. However, if you're using the blocks, you will activate it once you add the water. If you do add water, otherwise you would just have the color that goes down from the block, which is not as saturated as the color once you add water. So you would take the block and you can use that to create the images and draw different shapes, line work, whatever you need to do. You can use the blocks directly on dry paper and then go over with a brush and activate that color and blend and layer as you need to. Remember, with layering, let the layers dry in between. If you go with the block and you add it to a wet illustration, like onto, for example, these tulips, if I were to take a dry block and go into an area which is wet, I'm going to get a stronger pigment. So to avoid that, if that's something you don't want, try to let the layers dry in between and then you blend with the brush. Also, using the blocks, you can get a lot of expressive drawings and illustrations done with them, very loose paintings and drawings and illustrations. But sometimes if more detailed pieces, like I'm doing with this, for example, if I were to go down directly with the block, I can get harsh lines from the corners and edges and sides of the block, which may not be what I'm looking for a gentle, softer look. So in that case, going down with the block directly can have that effect, although it is helpful and it is very nice to have it to do some more looser and expressive illustrations. Also, another thing to remember when using wet in wet with the block, when you apply the block directly into an area that's wet or onto paper that's wet, you're going to get a very strong color. So that strong color is going to be on the paper and it's going to stain the paper. Like I said before, it's going to stain the paper and you won't be able to lift it off or blend it with the brush completely. You will still see that area where you just went down with the block, and it will show those darker tones. So unless you're looking for something that's darker and stronger pigment on the paper, it's better that you use a brush or you go down very lightly with the block. Don't press down very hard, then you can avoid getting strong colors and hard lines, which you would get if you draw onto your paper with the block onto wet paper. So those are a few things that I can advise you to do with the Inktense blocks and pencils. That's how I use them. So I guess that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, don't forget to like and share. It really helps the channel out. Also, if you'd like to see other videos and other art videos and art content that I have on my channel, then you could consider subscribing. Don't forget, I also have got a Patreon. The link is in the description box below, so you can have a look at that if that may be something you'd be interested in. And with that, thank you again so much for watching. Till the next one. Bye.